Well, welcome along everybody, or welcome back to Snetterton for the GT Cup Championship. If you weren't with us earlier on for round 7 of the championship, then worry not, because we've got the 8th round of the championship, the pit stop race, coming up very shortly indeed. Ideal, perfect conditions here, nice warm ambient temperature, a nice warm track temperature as well, so as the cars head out onto the grid on the build-up to this first pit stop race of the weekend, we are going to be in, I'm sure, for an absolute cracker. Well, as I said, we already had one round of the championship. That took place here earlier on today. So let's look back at some of the highlights from round 7 of the championship. Well, in the first race of the weekend, when the lights went out, it would be Richard Neary that would lead the charge up towards Richie's corner, whilst Richard Chamberlain muzzled his way through and ahead of John Seal up into second place at the wheel of the Porsche. Everybody else was busy squabbling for positions down through this enormous 36-car field. There was contact coming out of Agostini, which caused damage to the front end of the Fox Motorsport car of James Townsend. He would limp the Ginetta back to the pit lane for repairs. John Dillon also suffered his first misfortune of the 2021 season with a front left puncture on the Lamborghini. The Scott Sport crew would go to work changing the tyre on his car, but it would drop him down through the order and off the lead lap. And Mark Hopton had problems as the bonnet flew up on his Greystone McLaren. Having taken second place away from John Seal at the start, Richard Chamberlain found himself back under pressure for that position from the very same car. However, the safety car came out because of a problem on circuit. That was cleared away, and the race was about to get underway, with Richard Neary once more looking to try and make good his escape in the lead of the race, while the battles behind continued. John Seal's Lamborghini was coming under pressure from Lucky Kira's example, both of them looking identical, but they do run different groups. And elsewhere down through the order, the Marcos of Andy Roby was coming under pressure from Fraser Smart's Lamborghini. In the closing stages of the race, John Seal's Lamborghini would find himself under pressure from the Nissan of Graham Tilley. Graham Tilley snuck up the inside at Ritchie's, taking the place away, and the lapped car of John Dillon would go through as well. Despite being a lap adrift, the number 61 car in the hands of John Dillon would keep pushing the Nissan towards the checkered flag. Richard Neary would claim another win in the Mercedes AMG for Team ABBA Racing. It would be Lucky Kira finishing in second place, but the fight between Graham Tilley and the lapped car of John Dillon would continue until the checkered flag came out. And as for the former England cricket captain making a one-off appearance in the GT Cup, Freddie Flintoff would see the checkered flag and gain a signature on his racing licence in his first ever race. So a great opening race to the weekend here at Snetterton. As for the group leaders after race 1, well, leading Group GT3 in the championship is Team ABBA Racing, having claimed their 5th group win of the season so far. Leading Group GTC is the Top Cats Lamborghini. The Group GTB leading car is still the Team Hard Racing Porsche that Sam Randon raced in the race earlier on. And in Group GTH, it is the reigning champions, Simon Orange and Josh Jackson, and their McLaren that lead. Group GTA is also Simon Orange and Josh Jackson. They share the cars over the course of the season, so they are both eligible for championship points in each of the groups. And Group GTO is led by the JMH Automotive Lamborghini of John Seal and the pro driver, Jamie Stanley. That's our group leaders coming into this race, the 8th round of the championship. Now that car there starts from pole position once more. The grid for this race is based on the fastest lap times that were set in the race earlier on today, and Richard Neary managed to post a time that saw him quicker than anybody, and a fair chunk quicker than anybody as well, because his lap time that he posted was about 1.7 seconds quicker than anybody else could manage, and that's largely because he had the clear track ahead of him to accelerate into, whereas everybody else was squabbling largely amongst themselves. So Team ABBA Racing have had a really solid start to the championship season. They were lying at the lead of the Group GT3 Championship coming into this weekend. As we've just seen from the graphics, they continue to lead it. But in terms of the overall championship, when you look at all of the groups, they're actually lying second in the overall championship, or were at least coming into this weekend. So it's all very tight. There's a long, long way to go. And some of the cars that had problems in race number 1 are rejoining the grid for this one, not least of which Richard Chamberlain, who had a little bit of aero damage to his car. He did continue round and was able to at least post a finish, but that car was involved in a little bit of body rubbing, so he did drop down through the order and will be hoping for better fortunes in this particular race. It's also worth mentioning as well that at the tail end of the field, car number 118, the Fox Motorsport Ginetta, we are hoping is out. We saw on the highlights there that there was some body damage caused to that car. Well, one of the team members has made a 144-mile round trip back to Maldon in Essex and back to pick up a spare bonnet for that car. They have a spare bumper in the truck, but they didn't have a spare bonnet, so lots of work has been done, and it was nip and tuck as to whether they would get that car back out there. And looking at the back of the grid, I'm not entirely convinced, I'm afraid, that car has made it. So despite the very best efforts of the team, I don't think we're going to see the Fox Motorsport car of Ian Duggan, who was scheduled to have started the race, and James Townsend starting from where it should have been at the back of the grid. That's the Radical RXC. The man from Nottingham, Steve Burgess, is going to start this race. They claimed their 5th group win in Group GTO earlier on this afternoon, and it's nice to see the Radical RXC. Fantastic looking car, isn't it? They are available for the road as well as a road version, but yeah, Steve, who is a long time Radical racer and has been hugely successful in Radicals as well as Steve Burgess over the years in that Group GTO car. Steve, also a former British quad bike racing champion. He was many years ago, and a British Superlights champion, so we'll see how he gets on. That's the number 34 car. That will be started by former British touring car racer Richard Marsh. Sam Randon did great things with that car in the sprint race earlier on. He will take over that car later on, because this is a pit stop race. It is a 50-minute race. The pit window opens at various points in the race, depending on which group you are in, and I'll guide you through all of that very shortly indeed, because it's sort of a split pit window in reality, just to ensure that the pit lane with 36 cars there doesn't get too busy. That's the fantastic looking Brabham that Paul Bailey will start. It is the amateur drivers that start the race where they are partnered with a pro. A pro has to get in for part 2 of the race, so the Scotsman Ross Wiley will have to take over that fantastic looking, wonderful sounding Brabham for part 2 of the race. And just to guide you through it, so any cars that are in Group GTO, Group GT3 or Group GTC must take their pit stops between the 24th and the 29th minute of the race, the start of the 29th minute. So in other words, 28 minutes, 59.999 seconds. So they've got that period of 5 minutes to conduct their pit stops, whereas the cars in Group GTB, Group GTH and Group GTA stop after the 29th minute up until the start of the 35th minute. So it's a split window so that we don't end up with everybody piling into the pit lane at the same time. So for safety reasons, such as the capacity of this grid and the popularity of the GT Cup, then we do stagger the pit windows this year. So the cars are very shortly about to head off onto their formation lap. We can see the grid is being cleared of the final few team members. Sam Neary, I think, about to close the door on Dad's car that sits there on pole position. Just the odd marshal thereabouts. 2 cars sitting in the pit, in fact 3 cars sitting. Fantastic stuff they have got. Well done, I've got to say. Well done to Fox Motorsport. Didn't see the car on the grid, but there it is. You can see the bonnet is entirely different, as is the front bumper, to the rest of the car. But after a 144-mile round trip to Maldon in Essex and back, hats off to the Fox Motorsport team, because they have been up against the clock to repair that car and get it out. And there's a little wave as well from Ian Duggan behind the wheel. So fantastic stuff. It's not the only car starting from the pit lane, because I saw Lucky Kira's car in there as well, who finished 4th in the race. Who finished, 3rd in the race earlier on. In fact, 2nd in the race earlier on, 4th quickest lap time. Apologies. So off they head on their final formation lap. Let's guide you through the grid and the starting drivers and the success seconds as well as they head off on their formation lap. On the front row of the grid, it's the Team ABBA Mercedes started by Richard Neary, 20 success seconds in the pit lane, and alongside is number 5, which is Richard Chamberlain's car, also with 20 additional seconds to spend in the pit lane. Row 2 of the grid with 15 seconds, number 55 John Seal, and we should have had alongside car number 247 Lucky Kira, but we know he starts from the pit lane. Row 3 of the grid is 61 John Dillon, no additional time penalties to worry about, and 4 Graham Tilley, and row 5 is number 9 Top Cats Racing, an extra 15 seconds in the pits, and number 7 which has an extra 10 seconds, Steve Burgess. The next row of the grid will be row number 5, which is 47, Mike Brown, and alongside 34 is Richard Marsh with an extra 20 seconds in the pit lane, and row 6 is number 28, the Brabham in the hands of Paul Bailey, and number 35, which will be Nick Phelps in this race, an extra 15 seconds in the pit lane. Row 7 of the grid is car number 212, which is Stephen Walton, will start, and alongside is 29, Andy Roby, and row 8 is 96, Chris Kemp, and car number 26, which is Tom Rawlings. The 9th row of the grid, car number 1, an extra 20 seconds in the pit lane for Josh Jackson, and alongside is 67, Simon Orange with an extra 10 seconds to spend. And row 10 of the grid is number 82, James Guest will start, 15 seconds extra in the pit lane, and alongside is number 80, also with an extra 15 seconds, Craig Wilkins. The 11th row of the grid is 66, Morgan Tilbrook, and car number 50, Carl Cavers, with row 12 being number 90, Mike Price, an extra 10 seconds in the pit lane, alongside 41, James Simons. 13th row of the grid is 44, John Whitehouse, and number 15, David Holloway, with row 14 being 23, Ian Campbell, and 72, Chris Murphy. Row 15 is number 17, Russ Lindsay will start alongside car number 92, which is Rob Myers, an extra 4 seconds because that is a new entrant for this weekend. And row 16 is where we see number 3, Charlotte Gilbert will start alongside car number 19, which is James Hillary. The 17th row of the grid is number 6, Alex Stevenson, alongside car number 10, an extra 15 seconds because it's a new entry for the Team Harginetta in the hands of Freddie Flintoff. And then the final row of the grid is row number 18, car number 77, Mark Hopton, who had the bonnet fly up in the race earlier on and damaged the windscreen. That car's also back out. And then car number 118, which we know starts from the pit lane. So we won't see Ian Duggan starting from 36th. He will start from the pit lane in reality. If you're wondering how the success seconds come about, well, it depends on where you finish in the previous pit stop race that we have. So for winning the group, if you win your group, you have an extra 20 success seconds to spend in the pit lane for the next race. If you are second in your group, it's an extra 15, and if you are third in your group, it is an extra 10 seconds. So in reality, all of the cars will remain stationary for 60 seconds, plus the 18 seconds it takes to drive down the pit lane at the regulatory speed limit. So in other words, the cars from pit in to pit out, 78 seconds if they're on scratch, but all of those extra seconds that I gave you are added to that period of time. And what it does is it stops any one single car or driver combination as being too dominant in terms of the championships. It's an area where we can equalise the performance of the cars. So it is Richard Neary and Richard Chamberlain, the two Richards that sit there on the front row of the grid. The Mercedes and the Porsche. It's a Lamborghini second row of the grid as they start to get themselves into neat 2x2 order. A 50-minute race. Red lights are on the gantry. The lights go out now, and round 8 of the 2021 GT Cup Championship gets underway as they propel themselves up towards Richie's corner, and Richard Chamberlain's going to take up the lead of the race. Richard Neary dropping down into second place. It's John Seal that's there in third place, and John Dillon is going wheel to wheel with Steve Burgess in the Radical by the look of things. The cars that started from the pit lane finally released on their way. Contact, and that's John Seal who's got into the back of John Dillon. John Dillon gets going again right in front of Craig Wilkins, but we've still got a stricken Lamborghini up at the hairpin at Wilson, and that all got rather close. Bouncing across the grass goes number 44, John Whitehouse, a former champion who was having to try and take avoiding action, and it all got rather tight there with two cars rather stricken briefly in the middle of the Wilson hairpin. But I think thankfully everybody got away with it, albeit a few of them having to take avoiding action onto the grass. So picking their way out of the left-hander, you can see that Steve Burgess in the Radical, who was right up there before that incident, has now dropped his way right the way down through the order, so he was hugely compromised by whatever unfolded in front of him. As for number 61, John Dillon, he's having to pick his way back up through the order as well. Picks off the GT3 Aston Martin of Mike Brown, the ultimate speed car, and can continue to try and work his way up through the order. I mentioned earlier on today, John Dillon has been consistent so far this year. Well, he finished off the lead lap with a puncture in race number 1 and got tangled up as a result of contact at just the second corner in race number 2. So far, a weekend to forget for him. And into the pit lane, I'm afraid to say, didn't even get going, is James Simons. Something has clearly gone wrong with the Stanbridge Motorsport Lamborghini that runs to Super Trofeo specification. A quick retalk of the wheels by the look of things, and they should wave him out, but that is surely going to drop him off the lead lap, because our race leader, which is Richard Neary for Team ABBA Racing, already working his merry way up towards the conclusion of lap number 1. Now this car that leads will have an extra 20 seconds to spend in the pit lane, so ideally Richard Neary needs this to stay green all of the way and try and build an advantage. There's a great fight going on for second position as Richard Chamberlain looks to try and hang on to the place. He's under enormous pressure from the number 4 Nissan in the hands of Graham Tilley whilst they work their way past James Simon's car, which has now started from the pit lane and will hopefully stay out of harm's way. Up into 4th position. What a great start for the number 9 car of Jensen Lund. Jensen hadn't driven this car until the opening round of the season, had done a bit of testing in it, but new car to him, having competed with Top Cats Racing for the last few seasons or so in a Marcos, but an entirely different car. And both himself and Warren Gilbert, who share the car in this race, have got to grips with this car so well. They claim their 5th group win earlier on in the day and are leading the championship overall. And in a Group GTC car, they are running in 4th position overall. The second car in Group GTC, would you believe, is down in 16th position at this stage, and that's a car that in theory is pretty much identical specification, another Lamborghini running to Super Trofeo spec. Jensen Lund looking one way, looking the other at the Nissan of Graham Tilley in a straight line. The GT3 car isn't going to outgun the Lamborghini Super Trofeo. Now, Super Trofeo cars largely are more powerful but don't have the aero compared to a GT3. So let's just have a quick look. Now, Graham Tilley has actually pulled out an extra car length or so as they go through Brundle up towards Nelson. This is the 2nd place Porsche, the 3rd place Nissan, the 4th place Lamborghini. Leading its group as well at this stage is the Lamborghini. And that, I'm afraid, is Carl Cavers, who's had a spin. The Beluga Motorsport Porsche Cayman that runs in Group GTH, which is for GT4 specification cars, has had a rotation. He'll have to wait for the gap in the traffic, but he is not going to come through in the 13th place that he was at the beginning of the lap. So there goes Morgan Tilbrook as well. Now, Morgan Tilbrook might have been involved as well, so that might have been a scuffle between the two of them. Let's have a look. Yes, they were 13th and 14th respectively, so something must have happened between Porsche and Mercedes, I would have thought, because it looked as though that was a similar part of the track where they were both having to recover from whatever problem it was that had befallen them. James Guess is off the track. Limping into the pit lane is Chris Kemp in the other Stanbridge Motorsport car with a left rear puncture by the look of that. So there's been a few cars that have got themselves together in the early stages. But the fights still continue out on track as we are heading towards the first 5 minutes of this race. Now remember, for Group GTO, Group GT3 and Group GTC, pit window opens between the 24th minute of the race and closes just as we get to the end of the 28th and before the start of the 29th minute of the race. There is the Stanbridge Motorsport car, which has made its way back into the pit lane in the hands of Chris Kemp, but that is not what they wanted in the early stages of this one. Chris, who's raced in the 24-hour series and the Radical Challenge in the past, dropping down through the order. Now that's a car that's worth watching, I would say. Car number 247, which is Lucky Kira, remembered, started from the pit lane, gained 10 places on the last lap. There's James Guess still rejoining. He must have some damage. Yes, he has. Look at that front right corner of James Guess's car, heavily damaged, was scheduled to, throughout the course of the whole of the season, share the car with Darren Turner, ex-Works Aston Martin driver, and of course Le Mans podium finisher. But Tom Canning is the driver this weekend because Darren Turner is on duties at the Nürburgring 24-hour, but that car is also having to limp its way back into the pit lane. Enormous shame for the Feathers Motorsport machine. As ever, the Pirelli technical team inspecting any tyres just to try and understand as to what had caused the failure. But the battles continue out on track with, at the front of the queue, the number 41 Lamborghini with a queue of cars sitting behind it, which includes Richard Marsh's Porsche, Nick Phelps in the one with the pink livery on it. Then it's Paul Bailey coming under pressure from Steve Burgess at the wheel of the number 7 Radical, trying to carve his way back up through the order. Steve Burgess. But up front, 2nd and 3rd place, still together as well. Richard Chamberlain, the Porsche 935, the self-developed car that's been in a continuing state of redevelopment since the 1970s, really. There's not a lot of the original car left of Richard Chamberlain, but as ever, very clever engineering on that car, and is a stalwart, really, of the GT Cup Championship, leading Group GTO under pressure from the far more modern GT3 cars that sit behind, but still putting in some good pace at the wheel of the Porsche. James Simon staying out of harm's way whilst he is lapped by Mike Brown's Aston Martin. The battle of the two Porsches still going on as well. Now this will be for the lead of the group as well. This is Richard Marsh in the number 34 car under pressure from Nick Phelps, whilst James Guess has still not made it back to the pit lane, still limping the car back round. And are we going to have an overlap here? Richard Marsh coming under increasing pressure from Nick Phelps, but he's on the outside line for Oggies. Can he cut back on the exit of the corner? The Team Hard Porsche coming under pressure from the Veluga car, while Steve Burgess is trying to pick their pocket as well at the wheel of the Raw Motorsport prepared Radical RXC Coupe. Down the Bentley straight they'll go. You would expect the Group GTO Radical to work its way past the Porsches by the time they get down towards Brundle and Nelson. The two Porsches still defending on each other. Nick Phelps trying and get some sort of overlap. And Steve Burgess has outbraked himself, tried to turn into the corner, realised it wasn't going to happen, so straighten the Radical up. Where will he rejoin? He should not be able to gain an advantage. No, by the time he bumbles across the grass, through has gone the Brabham. Through has gone Mike Brown as well at the wheel of the Aston Martin. So a couple of places lost there on track for Steve Burgess, but both of those cars going through do not run in his class other than the Brabham yet. So the Aston Martin doesn't, but the Radical does. James Guess has finally made it back in towards the pit lane. Change of front left tyre for him. It's not the only car limping into the pit lane, because I've just seen another one limping in, and I do fear I know which car that is. I think it might be one that is running towards the sharp end of the championship, but I'll wait for confirmation of that. In a straight line, Paul Bailey at the wheel of the unique Brabham, the only one that's racing in Europe, works his way past the Porsches. Understandably so, because his car runs in Group GTO, the Porsches run in Group GTB. And no matter where you look, it is a very, very busy Snetterton 300 circuit, and everybody is fighting, including those at the sharp end. And all of this is just playing beautifully into the hands of Richard Neary. Remember, the car that started from pole was looking to try and make good his escape. He needed to ensure there were no safety cars, and at the moment, he's got a 15-second lead and has just posted the fastest lap of the race, 1 minute 52.546, because Richard Chamberlain, Graham Tilley and John Dillon, here they come, down towards the bottom of the Bentley Straight, are all busy squabbling away and holding each other up for second, third and fourth in the race. New tyre bolted on board the Feathers Motorsport Aston Martin. James Guess can continue on his merry way. He will have gone off the lead lap and is coming under pressure from another couple of cars that have had problems. We saw the spin for Morgan Tilbrook in the GT4 Mercedes. Now, has John Dillon unlocked the door here? No, can't quite work his way through. And this is for group position as well, because Graham Tilley is third in the race, but is the second of the GT3 cars that we've got in the field. Coming under pressure from the GT3 Lamborghini that sits behind. And now that Graham Tilley's attentions are drawn to defence rather than attack, it's just allowing him to drop away a little bit from the orange Porsche in the hands of Richard Chamberlain, who is safely leading Group GTO at this stage. Out of Ritchie's in towards the braking area for the Wilson hairpin. Richard Chamberlain turns his way through. John Dillon up the inside of Graham Tilley, takes the place away, so the Lamborghini goes through and up into third place overall, and picks up second in Group GT3 with that move. Now John Dillon will hand the car over to the pro driver, Phil Quaife, for part two of the race, whereas the Nissan, in the hands of Graham Tilley currently, will be handed over to former British GT4 champion from some years ago, Will Tregurtha, who did not take part in the previous rounds. Did Will. It was Senan Fielding that was co-driving. And now there is, back into the pit lane, I'm afraid to say, Chris Kemp. So, problems for Chris Kemp. That car did have some difficulties in qualifying this morning with the power-assisted steering. And the way that the dollies are coming out tells you all you need to know. That car is going to be dropped back and pushed into the garage, I'm afraid. Fight going on. That is Mark Hopton at the wheel of the number 77 car. That's the car that had the bonnet fly up in the race earlier on, and is really putting the pressure on the 92 Porsche that lies ahead. No opportunity to work its way through at that part of the circuit though, so you'll have to just sit behind for the moment and see whether there's another opportunity elsewhere around the lap to try and steal the opportunity to grab the place away. Now, over the start-finish time, we saw Richard Neary there. Another new fastest lap for him, 1 minute 51.175, continually pulling away from Richard Chamberlain. The battle for the lead of Group GTB has still not been settled. Richard Marsh at the wheel of the all-white number 34 Porsche, run by Team Hard, still continuing to push. Nick Phelps is right behind him as well, so those two are having a fantastic fight for Group GTB. Nick Phelps in his first season of racing as well. And there's Freddie Flintoff, scheduled to hand over to Chris Harris, his fellow Top Gear presenter, both of them having a one-off outing in the GT Cup this weekend. For Freddie, he's had very little seat time. It is his first weekend of racing, and he said earlier on, just wanted to stay out of trouble. He did exactly that in race number 1. And for Chris Harris, it's going to be a difficult weekend as well, because he did one single lap in free practice before he handed the car over to Fred, so Fred can have more seat time. Chris is an experienced driver. He's classified as a pro and has raced in Blancpain, but having just done one lap in free practice, the next time he'll jump into the car is when all the rest of the pros take over, when the pit stop window's open. And Chris has done very little racing in the last few years because of his television commitments. Now facing the wrong way, the car that started from the pit lane, I'm afraid to say, the number 41 Lamborghini of James Simons, facing the wrong way. John Dillon also trying to work his way through and ahead up into second if he can, ahead of Richard Chamberlain. Where is Freddie Flintoff at the moment? Let's have a quick look where he sits in the standings. He is running 7th in Group JTA at this stage as the number 41 James Simons driven Stanbridge Motorsport prepared Lamborghini heads in towards the pit lane. So that's both of the Stanbridge Motorsport Lamborghinis now that have had a visit to the pit lane in this race. John Dillon trying to get the overlap on Richard Chamberlain. Oh, that was close between the pair of them. Richard Chamberlain just got the door closed at the bomb hole in time. That compromised the run out of the bomb hole for John Dillon and drops him back into the clutches of the Nissan. So great stuff for 2nd, 3rd and 4th places in this one. Just goes to show how hard fought this championship is. Now there is one of the dive planes being ripped off almost by the Stanbridge Motorsport crew to try and get James Simons back out into the race. Can't have that dive plane flapping around, so they'll have to try and move it out of harm's way. All of the time whilst the two Porsches are still busy squabbling away. John Seal is in between the pair of them now though, so that has been a change for position. John Seal has now moved up into 11th on this lap, whereas Nick Phelps has dropped down into 12th. And all of the time whilst Richard Neary just builds the advantage. He needed a 20-second advantage over anybody else in GT3 coming into this one, because that's how much longer that Mercedes will have to stop compared to others that don't have any success seconds to worry about. Well, he's now built a 24-second advantage, so it's all going to plan as far as the Nearys and Team ABBA are concerned. Steve Burgess, having been delayed at the start, is slowly working his way back up through the order, but he did lose a position on that lap to the pit lane starting number 247 Lamborghini of Lucky Kira, who I said was one to watch out for and is now charging his way through the field. Fights continue over the start-finish line. That's the number 90 McLaren, and that is very close indeed there. And again, just about able to close the door was Mike Price, but hovering around all of the time behind him is Josh Jackson. Josh is the reigning overall champion in the GT Cup, himself and Simon Orange having claimed that title last year, creating their own team for this year and changing cars as well, because last year was the Ginetta, this year the pair of them are sharing either Ginetta in one race or this McLaren, the GT4 car, in the other. And it's been a solid start to the season for them as well in the new car with their new team. So nose to tail, the two Group GTH cars go, both of them GT4 specification McLarens. The number 80 Ginetta of Craig Wilkins sitting behind. He runs in Group GTA, which is largely dominated by Ginettas, the G55s, but those G55s run to Ginetta Super Cup specification, so in other words, same spec as you would see for the championship that supports the British touring cars. And as they all thread their way onto the Bentley straight, this is the fight for 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th if we include Andy Roby, and 21st position if we include the number 26 car, which is started in the hands of Tom Rawlings for this race. Now, Andy Roby in the Marcos might have the legs on the McLaren. No, he's got the legs on the Ginetta, though. He's gone through and past, I think, has he? Yes, he has. He's gone through and past the Ginetta of Craig Wilkins. So up to 19th place now goes Andy Roby, down to 20th for Craig Wilkins. But this is a great fight going on between the two McLarens, and more importantly, it's for the lead of the group as well. So leading the group is 90 Mike Price, and coming under pressure all the time from the champions from last year. Out of the car, I'm afraid to say, is James Simons, so disappointment for both sides of the Stanbridge Motorsport garage, because Chris Kemp retired some time ago. Now, this car earlier on today claimed to win in Group GTA, car number 212 just going through. There goes the Marcus in the hands of Charlotte Gilbert, and this, as we say, is the lead battle in Group GTH. So the two McLarens going at it. Group GTH is for the fully GT4 compliant cars, so in other words, the same specification as you would see running in the European Championship. And there's Craig Wilkins in some damage to the front right corner off his Scott Sport prepared Ginetta, whilst the race leader now is well and truly amongst the traffic. So I think the quick lap times for the moment are not going to happen for Richard Neary, but he's done all the hard work in the early stages, working his way past the number 92 Veluga Motorsport Porsche, started by Rob Myers. New entrant for the championship for this weekend is Rob Myers, sharing the car with pro driver Charlie Holling, and staying out of harm's way of the race leader. Now this will be the battle now for second and third position. Richard Chamberlain leading Group GTO, getting caught by the third place car, which is the second of the GT3 cars we have in the field. So it's not for group position, it is just for overall position. So Richard Chamberlain arguably could let the Lamborghini go through and wouldn't be off in a worse position come championship points. And there, I'm afraid to say, number 77, that's a rotation for Mark Hopton. That's the car that had the bonnet fly up in the race earlier on. Hard work done by the Greystone GT team to turn that car around and get it going. And that's exactly what Mark Hopton needs to do. Turn it round in the right direction, get it going with 32 minutes to go. Now, Lucky Kira has done a really good job. Pit lane start, remember, for that particular car, the Simon Green Motorsport prepared machine, and he's now catching up with the Brabham in the hands of Paul Bailey. So it's a GT3 car catching a Group GTO car now. The 5.7 litre V8 engine Brabham, which in normal form would produce 700 brake horsepower, but because of the balance of performance to equalise all of the cars, it's only running at 60% throttle just to try and make sure that it doesn't run away in Group GTO, because it really is a staggering car. Brabham Automotive doing a great job to build this car up, and Paul Bailey with many supercars in his collection. Comes from Rutland and has been a former champion on more than one occasion in the GT Cup, looking to try and keep Lucky Kira behind. So out of Oggies up towards Williams they will go. 6th place still the Brabham, 7th place still the Lamborghini. Paul Bailey having to work overtime to try and keep it behind. First race weekend we've seen the Brabham out because of a few issues. They've run the Ferrari for the earlier part of the season, but Paul Bailey and former British GT4 champion Ross Wiley, who shares the car with him, having a first race weekend in this particular car this season in the GT Cup Championship, and are running inside the top 6 at the moment, but for how long, such is the pace of Lucky Kira. Now we've got 3 cars fighting the way for the lead of Group GT8 by the look of things, because the number 90 car of Mike Price and then the number 1 car that we saw, which was Josh Jackson, have now been joined by Tom Rawlings. So 3 McLaren 570S GT4s all together for the lead of the group. So that could be a really interesting one come later on. I do feel, though, that Mike Price might lose out a little bit, as will Josh Jackson, because Tom Rawlings, the 3rd car in the train, the number 26 car, has no success seconds to worry about. So that car will come into the pit lane, and in theory, after being stationary for 60 seconds, as long as the driver change is done, they can work their way through. And John Dillon's worked his way through as well. Finally, he's unlocked the door to 2nd place, and there's problems, I'm afraid, for the Porsche of Richard Chamberlain. Slowing out on circuit is Richard Chamberlain. Through goes Graham Tilley. Now, hopefully the Porsche can limp its way out of harm's way, but that is such a shame for Richard Chamberlain. When the Porsche goes well, it goes really well, but it has, over the course of the years, appeared to have been a little bit highly strung on occasions for what is a car which, as we say, harks back to the 1970s, so it's certainly not the newest car out there, and I think Richard has just about managed to get the car out of harm's way, but that is a shame. That's not a nice sight to see that Richard Chamberlain has retired, I'm afraid. Hugely enthusiastic driver, but the Porsche on this occasion has failed him. Hopefully some overnight work will sort that out, and we'll be back out for both the sprint race and the pit stop race that we'll see tomorrow. Freddie Flintoff making his way up towards the braking area for Brundle and Nelson. Top Gear presenter since 2019. Was part of the England cricket team from 1998 through to 2009, and that is the car that won the championship last year. Josh Jackson, he'd been having that great fight with Mike Price and with Tom Rawlings, but something has happened there somewhere at Palmer, and now, is there any obvious damage to any of the cars? We'll have to wait and see. For the moment, though, he's recovering off the grass and back onto the track. So up towards the end of the lap comes Freddie Flintoff, and who claimed 226 Test match wickets for England in his 79 tests. He's been a real test for him this weekend, trying to get to grips with an unfamiliar track, an unfamiliar car, and I've got to say has done admirably well as well, under the tutorage of Mike Simpson, who is Works Ginetta driver. Looking through the data, and even from qualifying this morning to the race earlier on, Freddie picked up 1.5 seconds in terms of lap time pace. There goes Steve Burgess, in 9th position now, the Radical. So had a really good start, but just, I think, lost time, almost getting tangled up in that incident up at turn number 2, when John Seal clipped the back of John Dillon, and that must have delayed him. Now over the start-finish line now comes what will be the battle for the lead of Group GTA. Now, this is the Team Orange Ginetta, driven by Simon Orange in this race, and right behind him is the Group GTA winner from earlier on today, claiming their first group win earlier on. Stephen Walton starts this car. Earlier on today it was driven by Chris Hart to victory in its group. Well, this is nose to tail between the pair of them now. Now, the number 67 car of Simon Orange has an extra 10 seconds to spend in the pit lane. Stephen Walton, that sits behind, no additional time penalty to spend in the pit lane, so arguably the number 212 car should go through when the pit stops occur, and it won't be that much longer now before the pit window opens. So 26 minutes to go is when we will see the first of the pit windows opening. So 26 minutes remaining. Oh, big squirrely moment there coming through Hamilton. Almost lost the tail end of the Ginetta there, and at the next corner at Oggies he does lose it, which allows the number 212 car to go through, and in the hands of Stephen Walton, not just gain the place, pick up the lead of the group as well. As for the lead of Group GTB, well, Nick Phelps now ahead of Richard Marsh, and starting to pull away is the white and blue and pink Porsche. Now, traffic now at this part of the race is going to be the key. Remember, the cars that are the more powerful cars in reality all pit first today. That it will not be the case for tomorrow. So the cars in Group GT3 for the GT3 homologated cars, the cars in Group GTO for the open spec cars, and the cars in Group GTC, which are largely the Lamborghini Super Trofeos, for this weekend at least, will all pit now in reality. So the pit window should be open for them now with 26 minutes remaining, less than. So we might start to see a few of the cars come into the pit lane, and you would have thought, of course, with the AMs having to start the car and the pros taking over, common sense would tell you, get the pro in as soon as you can for part 2 of the race, and that puts you hopefully in a stronger position. Now, John Dillon has worked his way through and past the traffic. Rob Myers at the wheel of the GT4 Cayman, coming under pressure from David Holloway's Aston Martin. They will be squabbling for 22nd and 23rd places, I think that will be. Yeah, and into the pit lane they start to pour. So in comes Richard Neary to hand the car over to his son Sam Neary. He'd done all of the hard work to build up a handy 28.8 second advantage. He only needed 20, so that was a good stint from him. Freddie Flintoff still continuing on his merry way. The pit lane filling up. In comes number 61, which is John Dillon. So that will be handed over to the hugely experienced Phil Quaife for part 2 of the race. Phil, who we've seen racing in British GT and Blancpain. He's had class wins in the Dubai 24-hour. We've seen him in the Barcelona 24-hour. He was a former Radical champion some years ago as well, and a champion in the Porsche Carrera Cup GB Pro-Am section a few years ago. In comes Graham Tilley as well, so that will now be handed over the number 4 car to Will Tregurtha, 2017 British GT champion. Lucky Kira still continuing on. Now, he drives solo this weekend. We have seen Lucky out with a few drivers over the course of this season, but for the moment, the progress of the number 247 car, bearing in mind he started from the pit lane. Yes, others have now pitted, but he's up to 2nd in the race. John Seal is in. That's to hand over to Jamie Stanley. So out of the car comes John Seal, the number 55 car. Into it will jump the 37-year-old from Chester, Jamie Stanley, who was the champion in GT Cup GTC back in 2014. He was also the champion in British GT GT4 back in 2010. While Sam Neary now, having taken over the number 88 ABBA racing car, takes up not quite the lead of the race as yet, of course, because they will have lost the lead during the pit stop window. Now, the next car that Sam Neary will want to try and thread his way through and past will be Freddie Flintoff, who has been thoroughly enjoying his time behind the wheel of the car, but he did say he knew this was going to be tough. It's fine driving cars quickly, but to try and hone that to racing pace and a racing skill was something that he knew was not going to be easy, and I think he's done a fantastic job over the course of this weekend. So it is just a one-off outing in the GT Cup Championship, but for Freddie, he has done what he wanted to do. He knows other people are in this for the full season. He knows they've got championship points to think about, and what he didn't want to do was get in their way and cause them problems. And well, if that's what you've wanted to do, Freddie, you have ticked every box so far, and throughout the course of the weekend, more seat time, picked up more and more and more pace. So for a first ever race weekend, begs the question as to hopefully where we'll see Freddie in the future. Hopefully back competing in some more GT Cup races, time allowing of course for him. Now the cars that are starting to come up behind him are the Group GTB cars, which can't pit as yet. That is still Nick Phelps, and then the next of the Porsches. Here comes what is now Phil Quaife, who's taken over the number 61 Lamborghini. So that, in theory, should work its way back up into second position. And in comes Lucky Kira, so he's pitted a little bit later than the rest. As I say, he will remain behind the wheel of the car. He's going to park right at pit lane exit end. Steve Burgess is also in. That will be to hand over to former Radical champion and former Mini Challenge champion, Ben Dimmock. But the cars that are running in the second batch of groups, which is Group GTB, Group GT8 and Group GTA, can't quite pit as yet, so they will have to wait until there are just 21 minutes less remaining in the race. So between the 21st and I think it's the 15th minute of the race, they can head into the pit lane. So we will start to see all of these cars carve their way into the pit lane before too much longer. Following that spin for the number 1 McLaren, I'm afraid to say it dropped from what was second in the group all the way down to 7th, and is now coming under pressure from James Guess, who is a further lap adrift of it, of course, because he had to come into the pit lane and lost a raft of time when he had that front right puncture on the Feathers Motorsport Aston Martin. So pivotal part of the race now. Pit stop window now opens for the second batch of cars. We can see a little bit of damage to the front end of David Holloway's number 15 Aston Martin, who comes in instantly. So as soon as the pit window opens, into the pit lane he comes in the 15 car to hand it over to yet another former British GT champion, the 2007 British GT champion in the GT3 class. Bradley Ellis will take over that car. Now, are we going to see Fred come in on the end of this lap? Is Ginetta just working its way out of Oggies now, and will be handed over to Chris Harris for part 2 of the race. Chris, who has done very little racing in the last few years and was a regular in the Blancpain series, which was the European GT series for a good number of years, racing with Garage 59, which used to come to another MSV operated circuit. Brands Hatch was where we had the UK round for the sprint series, and it would head to somewhere like Silverstone for the endurance series. But Chris has done very little competitive racing in the last year or so. Certainly it's been a good number of years since he's raced at Snetterton. This is still the lead battle for Group GTB. This has been a great fight, and well, at the moment it is still just Nick Phelps that has the upper hand. Into the pit lane comes the car that he had been doing battle with, which is Richard Marsh, so he will hand the car over to Sam Random. Nick Phelps hangs on to the lead of the group. Now he is going to continue behind the wheel of that car, so there's no driver change to worry about, whereas Richard Marsh dives out of the Team Hard prepared Porsche, almost hurled out of the Porsche was he, and Sam Randon is on hand to take over that car. And Freddie's in as well, so into the pit lane comes Freddie Flintoff. His first ever racing weekend is done and dusted. They will not be out tomorrow due to commitments from both of them. We will not be able to see that car out tomorrow, so Freddie's out of the car. Into the car now jumps Chris Harris. Say we've seen him racing in the Porsche Super Cup, Spa 24 Hour in the past as well, Chris Harris. Porsche Carrera Cup GB he did a bit in, and even Rally GB back in 2005 we saw him in Rally GB, and that's without mentioning his single-seater career that he had, where he was racing in Formula Palmer Audi for a period of time. So he will jump into the car. As we say, he's only done one lap all day really. That was purely to give Freddie Flintoff as much seat time as he possibly could, but wonderful to see them out over the course of this weekend, and hopefully they're on for a reasonable result. Sam Neary certainly looks as though he's on for a reasonable result. The Team ABBA Racing Mercedes continuing to show a clean pair of heels to everybody else so far. Sam was recently brought in as a BRDC riding star. There is Freddie out of the car and ready to, I think, conduct an interview or two in the pit lane area. Chris Harris now safely behind the wheel, waiting for the clock to tick away. Despite the fact that they are new to the championship, if you are a new entrant, you do still pick up some success seconds, so an extra 15 success seconds. So the clock has ticked away. Chris Harris at the wheel of the GTA Ginetta can make his way back down the pit lane and into the race. Now the number 92 car, Rob Myers, I'm sure, has been in now to hand that car over to Charlie Hollings. Chris Harris makes his way back out of the pit lane. You can see the warm conditions. Just look at the heat haze on the long shot. Now Chris is going to feed out just as Will Tregurtha sweeps his way past at the wheel of the Nissan. It's going to take a lap or so for the order to settle itself down, but Sam Neary is leading the race at the wheel of the Mercedes. Phil Quaife will be second, and I think that Nissan that's just swept across the nose of that number 10 Ginetta in the hands of Will Tregurtha should now be up into third place, but it's going to take another lap and probably all of the pit stops to cycle through before we can confirm exactly what is going on. And we do now have the Group GTB class leader in as well, so that's Nick Phelps is in. So the pit stops are still taking place. The 67 Ginetta is in, so that is Simon Orange. So he won the championship last year with Josh Jackson when they shared a Ginetta. For this season, what we see is one of them driving one car one day and one of them driving it the next, or they share it from meeting to meeting. The Group GTA Ginetta and the Group GT8 Porsche. Oh, that was close. Rob Myers coming into the pit lane, hasn't pitted as yet. He's now about to hand over to Charlie Hollings, and also Morgan Tilbrook at the wheel of the Mercedes heading in to hand over to his co-driver. So to a halt comes the number 66 car of Morgan Tilbrook. Marcus Clutton will take over that car, and we'll see as to where that feeds out. Marcus Clutton, guess what? Another former British GT champion. He was the GT4 champion back in 2011. He was also the Radical champion, the Radical Challenge champion last year. So Tom Rawlings is in at the wheel of the number 26 car to hand over to Mo Ritson. Now I think this could be the car that would pick up the lead of Group GTH, but depends on when it feeds its way back out, and can it get back out onto the pit lane ahead of this car here, which is the number 90 car that was in the early stages of the race in the hands of Mike Price. It's now been handed over to Callum MacLeod. Now Callum is a former European Formula 3 Open champion when he was having his single-seater career back in 2009. He was a champion in Formula Ford Great Britain as well. Now, it certainly looks as though Mo Ritson, who was racing not long ago in the Junior Saloon Car Championship, has come out of the pit lane ahead. But, of course, Callum is a true pro. Mo is not a slow driver at all. But Callum MacLeod has got lots of sports car racing experience, having moved over from single-seaters, including both in the British GT Championship and in the European Series as well, the Blancpain Series as it used to be called, now called the GT World Challenge Europe. Andy Roby looking to try and thread his way through and past Simon Orange's car, whilst also under attack from Will Tregurtha's Nissan that's looking to try and place a lap on both Ginetta and Marcos. Can Will sneak his way through? Pit window, just to confirm, is now closed. I think everybody has now conducted their pit stops or is in the process of just finishing them off. That being the case for Stephen Walton, who is handing over to Chris Hart. And it looks as though there's a slight delay there, just as they try and adjust the seating position for Chris Hart. And that's Chris Harris, I'm afraid. Is that problems for the number 10 Ginetta? He's only just taken over the car, and I'm afraid it's not going to be the result that the pair of them were looking for, himself and Freddie Flintoff. It is retirement, I'm afraid, for Chris Harris. He'll get out of the car. He's parked it in a fairly safe place, hopefully, so it should just be covered by localised yellows, but that's a sorry end to the weekend for Freddie Flintoff and Chris Harris in their one-off outing for the moment in the GT Cup Championship. 14 minutes of the race to go. The number 28 Brabham has now been vacated by Paul Bailey, and it's another former British GT champion, Ross Wiley, that's taken over it. Ross is now running in 4th position. That is the lead of Group GTO as well, so it's the leading open group car that we have in the field. Supported here this weekend by David Brabham, the man at the helm of Brabham Automotive. Glorious noise the car makes as well from its 5.4 litre V8 engine. And there out of the car, I'm afraid, is Chris Harris. So, yeah, just to confirm, retirement for Chris Harris, not the weekend that he would have wanted. The body language tells you everything you need to know. Such a shame for him, for Team Hard, and for Ginetta. Ross Wiley pushing on. Yellow flags at Palmer, that's because of the stricken car of Chris Harris, so that's being covered by the localised yellows. Ross Wiley just makes his way through that yellow flag area. I'm keeping my eye on the pace of the Brabham, because the first flying lap that Ross Wiley did, guess what? New fastest lap of the race, 1 minute 49.301. First sector of this lap, guess what? Fastest first sector of the race that we've seen so far. So the Brabham is coming alive now. Ross is the pro driver, huge amounts of experience. Paul Bailey is not slow at all, but Ross is pushing as hard as he possibly can. Ross Wiley's, what, 29 years of age. Paul Bailey is in his early 60s, I think, now. But Ross Wiley is using all of that experience as the pro driver to try and work his way up into contention. They lead the group anyway, but are we going to see that Brabham get itself onto an overall podium? I think that's a tall task in reality, because it's 20 seconds adrift of Will Tregurtha, and Will Tregurtha is a pro as well, because of course all of the pros have jumped on board for part 2 of the race. 12 minutes remaining. There goes the number 77 car. Say it was in the hands of Mark Hopton. Hugely impressed with Lucky Kira as well. Remember, that car started from the pit lane. He's going to be doing the whole 50 minutes, so he'll be starting to feel a little bit warm, a little bit tired now as well, because he has been pushing since the very beginning at the wheel of the Simon Green Motorsport prepared car, up into 6th position overall. There is Chris Harris again. Quick interview for him, having only just got out of the car. He's already busy working away. A lot of interest in Chris over the course of this weekend, and Freddie. Now the lead of Group GTB, just having a quick look, there coming into shot now is Nick Phelps. Now he was leading Group GTB, he has now dropped down into 3rd in the group, has Nick Phelps. So that's the effect of the additional success seconds, because he had an extra 15 seconds in the pit lane. So he's now trying to make ground on that again and try to work his way back up into contention in Group GTB. The car that leads Group GTB, by the way, is another Porsche. It's the all-red Porsche of James Hillary, who was doing this race solo and had no additional time penalties to worry about. So that's why he's taken up the lead of the group. Now this is Bradley Ellis, who is carving his way through the order. He's just moved up to 18th position, having got past the number 44 car of former champion Steve Ruston, taking over the car from John Whitehouse's Steve, the signature RV-backed car. And as for the number 1 car, say now that's the car that had been leading Group GTH in the early stages, but had to remain stationary for an extra 20 seconds. So that car now, with the spin that it had also, has dropped outside of the top 20 and is now down to something like 25th position and 10th in the group. So not quite panned out the way they would have wished. Still back marker lappery to be done for Lucky Kira. We're into the final 10 minutes of the race. It was another new fastest lap for Ross Wiley last time through, 1 minute 48.834 for the Brabham. So he's still making his way up through the order if he can. Now remember, it was what, a 19-second gap was it between himself and Will Tregurtha? Well, there's now only a 13.5-second gap, but we've only got 9 minutes to go, so I still think that the rate of close might not be sufficient, but that's something I'm just going to keep my eye on there. Whilst out front, comfortably leading, still working his way through the traffic. There's no respite at all in the work that has to be put in, because the circuit is so full of cars still, 36 cars having started this race, that Sam Neary cannot relax at all. He will be continually getting the information he needs through the pit-to-car radio as to how hard to push or how much he needs to ease off. His last lap was about half a second slower than Phil Quaife could manage in the second place number 61 Lamborghini, but Phil Quaife is 16 seconds behind, so that is a very tall order indeed. Ross Wiley going through shot there. Now this is Will Tregurtha. He is getting caught by the Brabham. The gap is coming down. Will still be pushing as hard as he possibly can. Maybe won't be too worried if the Brabham catches him, because Will is a GT3 car. The Brabham is the leading car we have in Group GTO, so it wouldn't affect the championship points accumulation for the Nissan. Weaving their way out of Agostini goes Lucky Kira, still trying as hard as he possibly can at the wheel of the car that started from the pit lane. 8th place Radical heads around the Wilson hairpin. There is Steve Glynn at the wheel of the number 3 Top Cats Racing Marcos Mantis. Took over that car from Charlotte Gilbert. Steve in just for this weekend. First time we've seen Steve out racing for quite some time. Was a long-time TVR racer. Good to see him back in the GT Cup Championship. Now there is Nick Phelps. He's coming under pressure from car number 212. Now that is the Group GTA leader, so that is the car that leads that group. Chris Hart behind the wheel of it. Nick Phelps at the wheel of the Porsche. This is for position overall. This is for 11th and 12th position, but it does look as though Nick Phelps has gone through at the start of the lap, and the more powerful Group GTB Porsche should be able to pull away, one would have thought. Another change for position. That's now a place gained from 20th up to 19th for Marcus Clutter, all the way round the outside of Steve Ruston to pick a place away from the McLaren. They'll stay to the right-hand side of the track, allow the GT3 Aston Martin in the hands of Mike Brown to squeeze its way through. The ultimate speed car gets past Steve Ruston, but can't deal with Marcus Clutton as well on the run up towards Ritchie's corner, so we'll have to wait until the exit of the corner, and the more powerful GT3 car should be able to get through on the inside in towards the braking area for the Wilson hairpin. Yep, so job done. That is just pure lappery, but Marcus Clutton is fighting back, you know. Not for position. As the Aston Martin runs in 7th, whereas the Mercedes runs down in 19th place. So we're now at 6.5 minutes still remaining. 19th, 20th, 21st positions heading in towards shots. Sam Neary still trying to work his way past traffic. That'll be Ian Duggan now that's taken over the number 118 car. I think, no, Ian started it. It'll be James Thompson that's behind the wheel of that car. It was Ian that started that car. So that has been dealt with by our race leader, who's got a 14-second gap at this stage. Now, the one I'm going to keep an eye on is still 3rd to 4th place, because Ross Wiley at the wheel of the Brabham has just set another new fastest lap. A 1 minute 48.717 a couple of laps ago was the fastest lap that he popped in, and that 13.5 second gap is down to 8.7. So it is coming down the right way as far as the Brabham BT62 is concerned. Here he comes now in towards the braking area. This will be for the left-hander Agostini. Are we going to see the Nissan ahead of it? No, there's still a bit of work to do, but that car is pushing as hard as it can through the first sector of this lap, though. He's a little bit slower than the Nissan, so has lost a little bit of pace in the first third of this lap. Now, even if he catches the Nissan, it's not a great time to catch, let alone get past. And remember, it's not actually going to affect the championship points that either would score, because that glorious-sounding Brabham is in Group GTO, whereas that car there is in Group GT3, and both of them are on the Bentley Straight at the same time. So are we going to see them close sufficiently to each other so as to form a squabble? Let's have a quick look. Lost time through the first sector, but was 1.1 seconds quicker than the Nissan through the middle part of the lap. So, yeah, Ross Wiley is on his way, but can he close up the 8.7 seconds in what is now less than 5 minutes to try and get himself on the overall podium? So it's GT3 cars, 1st, 2nd and 3rd. Sam Neary, number 88 for the Mercedes from Team Abbott, leads the race. Phil Quaife and John Dillon, who share the number 61 car, are 2nd. Wiltshire Girth and Graham Tilley, who shared the Nissan, are 3rd. But the leading Group GTO car, Paul Bailey, handing over to Ross Wiley, is 4th at the moment. 5th is number 55, which is John Seal and Jamie Stanley's car, completing the top 6 from the pit lane start. Hats off to the performance of Lucky Kira, car number 247 with his Lamborghini. So there goes Nissan. Where is Brabham? Should be coming into shot now. Yeah, the gap is closing not to the same degree now. It only closed by a second that time through, and some of that may well be the TechServe team getting onto the radio for Wiltshire Girth and saying, you know, come on, you might just need to up your pace a little bit, improve on the deltas, and if you do that, you will hang on to an overall podium spot. But he might now be able to see the lights on that Brabham BT62 in his mirrors. Unique car, the only racing Brabham we've got in Europe. Andy Roby over the start-finish line. Who's he got queuing up behind him? The Group GTA battle by the look of things. Yeah, that is the car that is in the hands, number 212, of Chris Hart. Under pressure now for the lead of the group from Simon Orange. Now, the car ahead had to stop for no additional time penalty, whereas Simon Orange has made up the 10-second deficit that he needed. because he had to remain stationary for an extra 10 seconds in the pit lane, and this is for the lead of the group, so great stop. They're fighting for 13th and 14th overall. Could Simon Orange squeeze his way through? He's going to have a go. You see the nose of the Ginetta dip heading in towards Agostini. Thought better of it, but that's allowed a little mistake from Chris Hart to run wide and straight away on the run down in towards Hamilton. He's got the inside line and should go through Simon Orange, yet he takes the place away, moves himself up into 13th place overall, and now picks up the lead of the group. Now that he's grabbed the place, can he pull away? It certainly looks as though already he's put a couple of Ginetta lengths between himself and the erstwhile group leading Make It Happen Racing Ginetta. Bouncing over the curbs is Chris Hart in his efforts to try and keep up with the car that he's just lost the group lead to. Now the Brabham last time through posted another new fastest lap of the race, 1 minute 47.782, so the gap is now down to just 4.3 seconds. So Will Tregurtha might miss out on a podium, but there's only now, what, a lap and a bit really to go. So here comes our Group GTA lead battle. There is the Brabham working its way past Charlie Hollings and also trying to squeeze past what is Josh Jackson's McLaren. He'll have to wait to get past the Team Orange McLaren. You could see in the background the Nissan going through shot, so the gap is coming down all of the time. A little bit of traffic that Ross Wiley had to deal with will just compromise that part of the lap, but we know the middle section of the lap is where the Brabham is very good indeed. There goes the Nissan, and looming ever larger in the mirrors of Will Tregurtha is the Brabham. So it is just purely for the overall podium, will not affect their championship point scoring, but you can see the two of them now are substantively closer together than they were a few laps ago. Those extra fastest laps that have been banged in on 2 or 3 occasions by Ross Wiley have really closed the gap down from what was 13.5 seconds a few laps ago down to 4.3 at the start of this lap, and the gap is coming down ever more. So there goes the Nissan. First sector of the lap, the Brabham was 0.2 quicker. Middle part of the lap, it was 0.7 quicker. So it might come down to about 3 seconds possibly by the end of this lap. We'll have to have a look, but this will be the last opportunity really for Ross Wiley. Through goes the Nissan. Over the start-finish line goes the Brabham. The gap is down to 2.1 seconds. So is that doable? It came down by 2.2 seconds last time through, but that was just rate of close. That did not allow for overtaking, so Ross Wiley cannot afford to ease his pace. Equally, Will Tregurtha can't afford to ease his, and they can't afford to come across yellow flags or stricken cars like Andy Roby's, which is facing the wrong way at Oggies at the moment. Through has gone the race leader Sam Neary past that stricken car. It will get going though before this battle for 3rd and 4th starts to appear. Sam Neary will be propelling himself down the Bentley Straight for the final time and towards the checkered flag. But what's going to happen for 3rd and 4th place overall? There's still traffic for Will Tregurtha to deal with as well. That's not what he wants on what will be the final lap of the race. It's a GTH McLaren, and it looks like the Century Motorsport car that lies ahead of that are busy squabbling away. As for our race leader, no such worries, because a 13-second advantage is what Sam Neary has coming onto this last lap of the race. So the Brabham, quick in a straight line, might be able to close right the way towards the coattails of that Nissan down towards the bottom of the Bentley Straight. But Sam Neary, Richard Neary doing the hard work in the early stages, his dad, but it's going to be yet another win for Team ABBA Racing. That now makes it 6 overall wins for the 2021 GT Cup Championship season. It should be the number 61 Lamborghini of John Dillon and Phil Quaife. Here they come over the start-finish line now to finish in 2nd place. And what's going to happen for 3rd? Can the Brabham get through? Let's have a quick look. Yes, it's already gone through. So through has gone Ross Wiley, and it looks as though that Brabham is going to finish in its first pit stop race of the season in the GT Cup Championship. Is going to finish in 3rd place overall. It wins Group GTO as well with that one. So through comes Paul Bailey and Ross Wiley, who brought the car towards a checkered flag, to finish in 3rd place overall. Graham Tilley and Will Tregurtha's Nissan will finish in 4th place. 5th place should be the Jamie Stanley driven to the checkered flag, John Seal having started, number 55 Lamborghini Huracan. So that will finish in 5th place overall, just waiting for that car to head towards a checkered flag. Here it comes now, be the next car over the start-finish line. So there goes the 5th place car, finishing 2nd in Group GTO as well, and then completing the top 6. What a drive from the pit lane as well. Hats off to Lucky Kira, car number 247. That was a solid performance from him to start from the pit lane. Finished 4th in the group, and 6th overall. That must have included a lot of overtaking and, without question, a lot of hard work. And I think it's fair to say there was a lot of hard work put in by Paul Bailey in the early stages, but an even bigger shift put in by Ross Wiley, who brought that Brabham home into 3rd position overall. So fantastic stuff from the GT Cup competitors. Over the start-finish line now, that's the number 9 car that just crosses the start-finish line now. That's the Jensen Lunn and Warren Gilbert shared car, which has claimed to win in Group GTC. It might finish down in 27th position, but because of the problems that befell the other cars in that group, it was actually a group win. So they will be more than happy with those championship points, because it's the number of starters in the group that matters, and there were more than 3 starters in that group, but it was the only finisher. It had its own problems, but it should still pick up maximum group points for that one. So the last few cars just taking the checkered flag. The Neary's ABBA Racing Mercedes making its way in towards the pit lane, and then hopefully we can summarise the results. But we will see a DNF, I'm afraid, for Freddie Flintoff and Chris Harris in the Team Hard Ginetta in their one-off outing in the GT Cup Championship. But it's all gone to plan so far this weekend for Team ABBA Racing. They won the sprint race earlier on. That was their 5th group win of the season, and in round 8 of the championship they now score their 6th group win of the season. They have scored good championship points in every race so far this year, and bearing in mind they were originally just scheduled to come in for 1 or 2 appearances in the GT Cup, they have done so well they've now decided to dovetail this with their commitments in the British GT Championship. So they're busy guys are Sam and Richard Neary, running businesses in the week, racing most weekends as well, and certainly in GT Cup are going to be a force to be reckoned with. So the rest of the cars heading in towards the pit lane. Driver on the left just about to walk through shot in the overalls is Richard Neary, who'll be going up to congratulate son Sam. There it goes, Richard now with his mask on, working his way in towards what will be the Parc Ferme area. And well, it's been a solid start to the weekend for them, but they'll do it all again tomorrow as well. We'll have a further sprint race tomorrow and a pit stop race as well. So the last few cars just trickling their way in towards the pit lane, and then once they've done that we might be able to have a wrap up on the results. So we'll just confirm the results for you then. Car number 88, Richard and Sam Neary claimed the win. In second was number 61, which is John Dillon and Phil Quaife, and third, but the winning Group GTO goes the way of the number 28 Brabham of Paul Bailey and Ross Wiley. Fourth was number 4, Graham Tilley and Will Tregurtha. Fifth went the way of number 55, which was John Seal and Jamie Stanley, and 6th was car number 247, Lucky Kira. 7th was the Aston Martin, number 47 of Mike Brown. 8th place was number 7, Steve Burgess and Ben Dimmock. And 9th place was the Group GTB winning Porsche in the end of Richard Marsh and Sam Randon. Completing the top 10 was car number 99, driven solo in that race by James Hillary. The other group winners that we need to pick out, the winner in Group GTA was the number 67 Ginetta of Simon Orange, who finished in 12th place. The winner of Group GTH was the number 26 McLaren of Mo Ritson and Tom Rawlings, who started behind the wheel of that particular car. And because of the problems that befell everybody else in Group GTC, despite finishing in 27th position, it was still a group win for the number 9 Top Cats Racing Lamborghini Super Trofeo of Warren Gilbert and Jensen Lunn. And that wraps up our day's racing for the GT Cup Championship from Snetterton. We do have both races tomorrow for you live as well, which means that we will be looking forward to our sprint race that is scheduled according to the timetable to take place when the lights go out. It will be 12:15. It'll be about 12:05 that we will get the stream live, and then the pit stop race will take place tomorrow. Starts at 3 o'clock, but the build-up to that race we will go live on the stream around about 14:50, so 10 to 3 in the afternoon. So from everybody here at Snetterton, I hope you've enjoyed round 7 and round 8 that we've just seen of the 2021 GT Cup Championship, but please make sure you're back with us tomorrow. Until then, it's goodbye.